It's switched completely to tell us, I understand that you intend to go to our 19th province, Taiwan. We have no objection to you going to our 19th province, but after the reunification of our country. And then he said, you are all diplomats. And we said, no, no, we are parliamentarians. You don't understand. We are not here representing the British government. We are doing an inquiry. And our presence and our visit will not in any way change the British government's policy. We are doing it because we need to investigate the issue of Taiwan and its relationship with China. And he said, if you do this, there will be serious consequences. So we wondered what those serious consequences were. But actually, as the Right Honourable Member said, the visit continued. We went to Tibet, we went to Shanghai, we went back, then we went to Taiwan, and for the Foreign Affairs Committee there were no serious consequences. Later on in the last Parliament, we decided as a committee, when we were looking at human rights issues globally, to receive the Dalai Lama and have a public evidence session, which I chaired, with the Dalai Lama. At that point, I received a very long, vitriolic letter from the National People's Congress in Beijing, and a visit from the then Chinese ambassador, who subsequently became a deputy foreign minister, containing further, bringing lots of different materials, including piles of books about the CIA's role in Tibet and various other documentation. The Chinese obviously are very sensitive. They always have been. They've always been concerned about issues to do with their status and the respect that others will have for China in the world. And we can have a robust exchange about issues of this kind. But never, ever has there been a ban on parliamentarians going from this House as a result of those differences. So this tells me that there's something happening internally in China which is worrying to me about this situation. In our report, after we did the inquiry in the last Parliament, we commented on the situation in Hong Kong. And at that time, we, in one of our conclusions, recommended that the government urge the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region to make significant, major steps towards representative democracy and to agree with Beijing a timetable by which direct election of the chief executive and LegCo by universal suffrage will be achieved. That, I hope, is a position which all of us, including members of the government and opposition front benches, could agree to today. It is, of course, a matter for the people of Hong Kong and China in the arrangements that have been set out under the basic law to come forward with proposals. But nevertheless, the aspiration for representative democracy and universal suffrage is one that should apply for all people as soon as possible, including in Hong Kong. We also commented on the internal situation in Hong Kong with regards to civil liberties, humanitarian issues, the rule of law. And our conclusion in 2006 was, at that time, that despite some concerns, overall, Hong Kong remains a vibrant, dynamic, open and liberal society with a generally free press and an independent judiciary subject to the rule of law. I hope that we can say the same about Hong Kong today. Obviously, our report will have to be published in due course when we have finished our evidence. But I think the behaviour of the Chinese authorities towards our committee, as well as other issues that have been raised with us so far in the evidence that we've already received, does raise a concern about whether those principles and those values are under threat today. I want to just conclude by making a more general point, and the reference has been made to it in passing. Some people believe that we should just turn a blind eye to this. Some people believe that the economic imperative should determine everything. But those of us that have been to Taiwan, those of us that have been to other countries around the world with significant Chinese populations, know that there is nothing inherently authoritarian, Stalinist, Leninist, or Maoist in the Chinese character. And what is it that is communist about China today? Only the name of its ruling party. You have a capitalist, state capitalist economic system which is run by an elite who basically hold political power through a one-party system and suppress and control dissent. Now, how sustainable is that for the future? I don't know. China's economy is turning down at this moment. The rate of growth is slowing. They have a major demographic problem long term, and China's ability to meet the aspirations of its people, which it has done, it's taken hundreds of millions of people out of poverty in recent years, is not necessarily sustainable indefinitely with its current political model. So clearly, there are big questions for the rest of the world about how we deal with a growing China. People talked about China's rise. And there is the author who is very well informed, although I don't agree with his, I think, rose-tinted conclusions, Martin Jakes, who wrote a book, When China Rules the World. Well, frankly, if China was to become the most important country in the world politically, that would raise very, very serious issues about what kind of universal values we would have, what kind of rule of law, what kind of humanitarian law there would be. And so I think there are issues that it may be a small point for some people that a committee of the House of Commons has been prevented from going to Hong Kong. But actually it raises fundamental questions. Yes, of course.
I thank the Honourable Man for giving way. And does he not agree that this visit that has been banned is indeed symptomatic of China's attitude to the rest of the world, and particularly her near neighbours? If you consider the aggression over the Senkaku Islands, the adventurism in the South China Sea, the intransigence on the Security Council that she has demonstrated.
I would be fairer to China. On some issues internationally, China has actually played a positive role. For example, on climate change issues, and certainly on some other matters of international security. I don't think it's all on the bad side, but there are concerns about the attitude that they have, and there are, as she has quite rightly highlighted, a number of territorial disputes around the coasts in East Asia, where a number of states are in contention for potential areas of gas and oil exploration and territory. But I don't want to go down that track now. I just want to conclude with talking about the issue of democracy. In our report in 2006, we came to a very important conclusion, and we were commenting on the point then about the Chinese military build-up across the Taiwan Straits and the possible threat of peace and stability in East Asia. Since then, relations between Taiwan and China have improved significantly. There are far more direct flights, there's a massive investment, there are millions of Chinese mainland tourists who go to Taiwan, as I saw last year when over the New Year, I was in Taiwan and the hotel I was in was full of mainland Chinese. But nevertheless, there is still a great sensitivity in China about Taiwan and what is happening there. And the Taiwanese people, and they have shown it in local elections recently, are very committed to democracy. They throw people out. They reject incumbent parties and governments on a regular basis. And we concluded in 2006, and I think it is pertinent still today, it is relevant, the growth and development of democracy in Taiwan is of the greatest importance, both for the island itself and for the population of Greater China, since it demonstrates incontrovertibly that Chinese people can develop democratic institutions and thrive under them. And that is also relevant for Hong Kong. And that is why what is going on in Hong Kong today matters, and it is why our committee is absolutely right to continue its inquiry, and in due course we will produce a report which the government will have to respond to, I hope, before the next election, so that we can have a further debate in this House about developments in Hong Kong and China over coming months.
Mr. Richard Graham.
Mr. Speaker, this House today debates under unusual, if not unprecedented, circumstances. And it is a matter of deep frustration, disappointment and regret to me that we are not only here to do this, but that I am here as an individual who has also played a part in the events leading up to this debate. For it is not only the Foreign Affairs Committee that has been effectively prevented from visiting Hong Kong, but it was also myself a week ago who was rejected a visa application to join the UK-China Leadership Forum in Shanghai, on the basis of which the entire parliamentarian delegation pulled out of that leadership forum. And so we have to ask ourselves the question, why has this happened? And the underlying answer, of course, is, as my right honourable friend from Croydon rightly mentioned, that we have a serious disagreement with China on our ability to discuss and debate issues in Hong Kong. And as other members have pointed out, it is a sad thing that even before the FAC report has been drafted, let alone completed, China has already come to the conclusion that it must be a negative report in principle because of its existence rather than because of its content, which is as yet unknown. And in the same way, Mr. Speaker, I clearly was penalised for having the temerity to organise a debate on Hong Kong on the 22nd of October. In my speech on that day, I congratulated Britain and China's leaders in 1984 in finding a formula and later the trust that maintained confidence within Hong Kong and by the world in Hong Kong. And I went on to say that 30 years on, the architects can congratulate themselves. Broadly, Hong Kong has thrived and remains special and successful. And I concluded at the end of that speech that the people of Hong Kong and we, meaning here all of us in Parliament, have no interest, no advantage, or no conceivable selfish purpose in any form of car crash with Hong Kong's sovereign master, China. Rather, it is in all our interests, but particularly those of Britain and China, in fulfilling the joint declaration that Hong Kong continues to thrive and prosper in a different world from that of 1984 or even 1997. Now, Mr. Speaker, I do not believe that there is anyone in this House or anyone anywhere who could take violent objection to the thoughts and beliefs behind that statement. But I'm afraid there was an objection, which I received today in hard copy. It had been posted with insufficient postage, so it arrived only today. And it came from Ambassador Liu of the People's Republic of China, who wrote to me. He expressed severe displeasure and disappointment about a letter that I had written to him some 10 days before the debate, outlining my reasons for holding it. And to recap the crucial part of the reason, as chairman of the All-Party Parliamentary China Group, I believe I have two main responsibilities, and they are outlined on our writing paper and clearly laid out on our website. The first is to provide a forum for debate on all issues of bilateral interest. And the second is to help inform parliamentarians through regular visits to China. And I believe, Mr. Speaker, that holding the debate on Hong Kong was fulfilling the first objective. But Ambassador Liu wrote to me that matters relating to Hong Kong are none but China's internal affairs, where China is firmly opposed to intervention or interference of any kind by any country or any individual, including the House of Commons inquiry, debate and investigation, including Hong Kong. Your insistence on having the aforementioned debate in the House of Commons has in effect meddled in the internal affairs of Hong Kong and sent out a wrong signal. Such moves, exploited by the opposition in Hong Kong, will only create an impression that Britain supports unlawful activities such as Occupy Central. Well, Mr. Speaker, I have read excerpts from my own speech. I do not believe that there is any objective reader of that speech who could reach any of the conclusions reached by Ambassador Liu in his letter, least of all an impression that Britain supports unlawful activities such as Occupy Central. Occupy Central did not feature in my speech at all. He went on to say that as chair of the All-Party Parliamentary China Group, quote, charged with the responsibility and mission of advancing China-UK relations, unquote, which is not strictly my mission, as I have just explained, he asked me to, quote, refrain from interfering in the internal affairs of Hong Kong as well as China, and urged me to do more things to promote China-UK relationship rather than disrupt and undermine its healthy development. Now, Mr. Speaker, it is true that relations at the moment between our two countries have improved considerably. Both my right honourable friend, the Minister in his place, and I were part of the very successful delegation led by the Prime Minister to China a year ago. Earlier this summer, we had a very successful visit by Chinese Premier Li Keqiang to the UK. All of us here want to see positive relations between Britain and China for precisely the reasons that I have outlined. We have much that is to our mutual benefit, much that are mutual challenges, and much together that we are doing to make the world a better place. But I do genuinely believe that the role of diplomats is to build bridges, not barriers, to solve problems, not to create them, to help bring our two countries closer together, and to strengthen the relationships between this Parliament and the National People's Congress in Beijing. And so let me therefore, for the record, Mr. Speaker, respond to Ambassador Liu's comments that I should do more things to promote the China-UK relationship. For 3 years, I was this country's British Trade Commissioner to China and also our consul to Macau. Later, I opened the first merchant banking group office in China and listed the first Chinese company on the London Stock Exchange. I was part of the Anglo-Chinese expedition, the first ever crossing of the Taklamakan Desert in 1993, and I should, Mr. Speaker, by most rights have died during that expedition by having amoebic dysentery, saved by some unbelievably strong antibiotics, which meant I couldn't eat for 5 days while walking some 25 miles a day in the heat of this hitherto uncrossed desert. So every day since the winter of 1993 has, to some extent, been an extra day in my life. And I vowed then, when I came out of the desert, so thin that my trousers literally fell down when I pulled them up, and went straight to Shanghai to open the office of my employers. I vowed then that I would dedicate a chunk of my life to doing things that would continue to help relations between Britain and China. And so, some 2 years later, my wife, Anthea, made me aware of what was happening in Chinese orphanages in Shanghai. She was, at the time, the person in charge of the welfare team in the Shanghai Expatriates Association. And many members will know that largely because of the one-child system, huge numbers of orphans, often predominantly women, were dumped on the doors of orphanages, where they would spend the rest of their life in an institution. This was a human tragedy. And my wife's dedication to helping 2 or 3 individual orphans led me to create a charitable company in Hong Kong called Children First, and to get pledges of significant amounts of money from businesses in Hong Kong to support the creation of what would effectively become a foster care system in Shanghai. At that time, talks with the Shanghai municipal government fell through, largely on the issue of trust about who would have control of the money. But the relationship with the Civil Affairs Bureau was so strong that when a British citizen, Robert Glover, arrived in Shanghai and was introduced by my wife to the Civil Affairs Bureau, he was able to take forward our original vision and create what is now Care for Children, which is the first ever joint venture Sino-British charity, and is now joint ventured with the central government's Civil Affairs Bureau. It has, Mr. Speaker, to date, taken between 250,000 and 300,000 orphans out of orphanages and into foster homes. It is a remarkable success, and I pay tribute to Rob Glover, who is in London this week, and all that the charity has achieved. And I'm proud to have been first its advisor and then later a director. So that is one example of a personal commitment to improving things between Britain and China, which I hope will lay out for the House that far from doing things to disrupt and undermine the healthy development between our 2 countries, I believe I have consistently tried to enhance the relationships. And in the same context, it is deeply disappointing that when the Foreign Affairs Committee rightly decides this summer, due to the events in Hong Kong and due to the 6-monthly update report on Hong Kong by Her Majesty's government, that it is time for them to write a report on the situation of the relations between the UK and Hong Kong. It is very disappointing that a China which is now in every way stronger, more confident, more robust than it was 35 years ago when first I visited, has been unable to recognise that this should be seen as a positive development, one to encourage, to open doors rather than to close them, to welcome the report, which in many ways may turn out to be a lot more positive than they will expect. So today's debate, Mr. Speaker, is unfortunate in many ways. When my